Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Retro Muscle. I'm actually really excited about today's episode because, well, I went digging through the archives. Like I said before, my parents were both bodybuilders, so they collected a lot of bodybuilding paraphernalia over the years, not only magazines and videotapes, and we also have some cassette tapes, and not just any old cassette tapes. Today, I'll be playing a Muscle Media 2000 exclusive interview conducted by Bill Phillips, and he's interviewing Mike Mentzer. And the way we got our hands on this tape was when you ordered the heavy-duty book set. I believe there was 3 books altogether. You got this tape included. I don't know if many people are aware of this tape, if it's out there, if YouTube, if some other page already has this, but I hope you really enjoy this because it's pretty informative. Not only does he talk about his training philosophies, but he also talks about politics in the sport, the 1980 Mr. Olympia specifically, and Arnold Schwarzenegger and Joe Weider. You know, he doesn't really have too many kind words to say. So sit back, enjoy. There's not going to be too many images, but trust me, it doesn't matter. The audio is all you need.
From Golden, Colorado, in the foothills of the Rocky Mountains, comes Muscle Media 2000. MM2K seeks out the people and the subjects you find in the Muscle Media 2000 audio tape series. At the end of the tape, we'll tell you how to reach Muscle Media 2000. Now, let's get on with it. Here's your host, Bill Phillips.
Okay, we're on the phone live with Mike Mentzer, and when we did a recent survey for our audio tape series, one of the most popular figures that our subscribers wanted to hear from was Mike. So we did the deal and we got Mike on the phone. And Mike, let me just take a minute and have you introduce yourself. A lot of people know who you are and your background in bodybuilding. But for some of the people who might be new to the sport, they might not know. Could you just shed a little bit of light on your background in bodybuilding and where you come from?
All right. I come from a small town in Pennsylvania, Ephrata, Pennsylvania. I started my training career almost exactly 30 years ago at the age of 11. I can remember very, very clearly. I was at a local newsstand with my mother, and while she was off shopping, I was looking over a vast array of magazines, and after a period of time, my attention became arrested by the sight of a bodybuilder, of course, on a Muscle magazine cover. I grabbed it, and there was an instantaneous love affair started. I've been doing it ever since, actually off and on. I started competing at the age of 18 in local physique contests, which I did very well in. I won my first contest, which was the Mr. Lancaster County, Pennsylvania contest. Not long thereafter, I went to the state level and won the Mr. Pennsylvania. Not long after that, I went to the Mr. America, the AAU Mr. America in 1971 and placed 10th in that behind Casey Viator and others. Casey was first that year. Not too long after that, I injured my right shoulder quite severely while training and was forced to lay off for several years. In late 1974, I started back training. I should say resumed training, and went into competition again in 1975, at which time I entered the IFBB Mr. America in Los Angeles, where I placed third behind Robbie Robinson and Roger Callard. That motivated me quite a bit, and the next year I trained very, very hard, came back to win that contest. 1976 IFBB Mr. America. In 1978, I won the IFBB Mr. Universe, or World Championships as they're now called, with the first and only perfect score in history.
Wow.
In 1979, I won my first pro contest, the Southern Pro Cup in Florida. Did well in several other professional contests, then won my weight class at the Mr. Olympia in 1979, placed second to Frank Zane overall.
So they used to have weight classes in the Olympia.
Right.
Under 200, over 200, or?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And you won the over 200 weight class in the Mr.
Olympia? I won the over 200 with a perfect score.
Wow, a lot of people don't know that.
Yeah. An interesting bit of history.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next year, in 1980, I placed fifth at the Mr. Olympia, a contest that I and almost everyone else who witnessed it was convinced was fixed,
Mm-hmm.
and as a result decided to drop out of competitive bodybuilding.
Really? Now, that was the year that Arnold won it back in Columbus. Was that?
That was in Sydney, Australia, in 1980.
Oh, okay, but, that was Arnold's comeback year.
Right.
Okay. Huh. And you were so frustrated by that, you just stepped out of competitive bodybuilding.
Well, frustrated in that I came to see quite clearly that there was corruption involved, that evil was not something you merely read about in newspapers and novels, that it's all around us.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, I had a glimmering of certain facts that led me to believe there might be something like this going on, but I wasn't so certain. This brought it all into focus, and I didn't want to be involved or associated with people like that, and decided to drop out.
Wow. What about, what have you been doing since then? I know you've stayed close to the sport, though.
Right. In 1983, I left Los Angeles, where I worked for Joe Weider and his Muscle and Fitness magazine, to go to Florida to work for Arthur Jones at Nautilus.
Okay.
I stayed there for a relatively short period, only 6 months, which is quite interesting, actually. A year or two prior to that, I said to an old friend of mine, I wouldn't mind working for Arthur Jones, if only for 6 months, to get to see how his mind works. As it turned out, it was only 6 months, and I left his employ. Went to Europe, performed numerous exhibitions and seminars,
Mm-hmm.
came back for a short period, actually a year and a half. I published and served as editor of my own magazine, Workout for Fitness, which was a more general fitness magazine, softcore bodybuilding magazine, as I called it.
Right.
That went under, and I went back to work for Weider as a writer. And then 4 years ago, in addition to still writing for Joe Weider, I started my own personal training business, which started out quite slowly. I bring that up for those listeners who might be considering starting their own training business or who are having trouble now. I was quite surprised that it did start out very slow. I thought that with my visibility and name recognition, I'd move into that business and it would be a spectacular success right from the outset, but it was not.
Mm-hmm.
The first 4 or 5 months, I only had a few clients and was on the verge of giving up when all of a sudden it just started paying off for whatever reason. It started to flourish, and I've been quite happy with it. Now, 4 years later, it's better still, in part as a result of my continuing my articles in Flex and Muscle and Fitness, and also as a result of several top bodybuilders finally recognizing that heavy-duty, high-intensity training not only works in theory, or is not only true in theory, but that it works in practice. People like Aaron Baker, David Dirth, David Paul, Lee Labrada, and last but not least, the most gracious and the greatest of all, Dorian Yates. I say gracious because prior to winning his first Mr. Olympia last year and since, he's been very kind to give me a good deal of credit. I found out just recently that after this last Mr. Olympia, at the breakfast seminar the next day, he talked quite a bit about me. Apparently he was motivated to start training as a result of having seen my photographs, having read my articles, bought and read my books. Not only was he inspired by the image of my physique, but he was brighter than the average bodybuilder. As a result of having read my books and articles, he came to understand the theory of high-intensity training, recognized its validity, used it, and went on to win European, British championships, Night of Champions, and now the 1992 and 93 Mr. Olympias.
Right.
So many people who may have been wary, skeptical, even openly hostile to the theory of high-intensity training are now not so much so. They're saying, geez, maybe Mentzer was right, or at least he was on to something. If it worked for Dorian Yates and he and Casey Viator and Ray Mentzer, there has to be something to it.
Right. Well, I want to talk in detail about that. I have a couple of questions that come to mind. And first of all, I'd like to second your comment on Dorian Yates. He is a really bright bodybuilder. The guy is very articulate, and he is really a gentleman.
Very much so.
I met him just last week down at Club Metrax, Dr. Conley's gym down there, where Chris Lund was shooting some photos, and he is a really a neat guy. And I've been around a lot of bodybuilders just like you have, and guys like him are pretty rare. So
yeah, I was just going to say that, Bill, he is quite rare. Not only is he brighter than the average bodybuilder, he's got a great attitude. He's benevolent, he's amiable, he's open and accessible to fans. He doesn't have this attitude that he's superior by virtue of having bigger muscles than anybody else.
Right.
He's a human being.
Yeah, I agree all the way. Now, you talked about the corruption in bodybuilding that really soured you on the competitive aspects of the sports, and then you said that you worked for Weider for a few years. Are you saying that the corruption in bodybuilding is with IFBB organizations and not necessarily the Weider camp or the judging? Or
I worked for Joe Weider and still do as a writer for Flex and Muscle and Fitness. Now, they do obviously have some association with the IFBB, but I'm not involved in that. I'm no longer a staff writer. I act as a freelancer. So I'm not associated with that element. I keep my distance from those people. I even rarely talk to Joe these days. Most of my conversations or my associations with that camp is with the editors.
Right.
Jerry Candela, John Little, Peter McGuff.
Right. But I mean, where was the corruption that you saw? I mean, is that in, like I said, the judging? Is that in the promotional side of it, or is that in the just the core of the IFBB, or?
Well, it has to do with the type of mentality that Ben Weider has brought into the IFBB. I remember many years ago I heard stories, and I came to know as a fact that several of the top IFBB administrators, judges, had criminal backgrounds. I thought that was quite interesting. And I realized later maybe it's not just a coincidence. I don't know. But it was a fact. It is a fact.
Well, that it's the only game in town, and they pretty much have their say-so in how they run it. So I guess
I still see problems, Bill. But of course, my experience was back then in 1980.
Right.
I saw that Arnold was the IFBB if he wanted to be, and that particular day in Sydney, Australia, the day of the Olympia, he was the IFBB. I had been given to believe prior to that Ben Weider was the president of the IFBB, and beyond that, he prided himself on being a stern, strong president. But on that particular day in 1980, he took a distant backseat to Arnold. Arnold seemed to be running things. He could have it any way he wanted.
Wow.
Only once I stood up at the pre-judging meeting did that thing come to at least a partial halt. That irritated Ben Weider, and he stood in between Arnold and I and tried to assert himself, but it became very clear, especially later on as the day proceeded, that things weren't the way they should be. Very, very clear. If it was just me saying this, of course it could be chalked up to sour grapes, although that's not true. I've lost contests before. I never raised a fuss. But that particular contest was so clearly fixed that every other competitor and many of the fans in the audience raised a fuss. And of course, in the aftermath, all the magazines carried articles pertaining to the fact that it was fixed. It was very clear. What makes it even more interesting, the very next year it happened again with
Franco.
This time Arnold running the contest. Either he's running it or he's winning it, or his friends are winning it. The next year, Franco Colombo won with a condition known as gynecomastia, where his breast tissue, or his chest, takes on the look of having breast tissue. His right leg was maimed in an accident a couple years before, and that looked deformed. And he went on to beat people like Tom Platz, who was in the best shape of his life,
Right.
and quite a few other people. It was a clear indication that Arnold Schwarzenegger and the IFBB were above ethical principles. They were literally snubbing their nose at the collective bodybuilding community. We run this thing and we'll do it any way we want. We did it last year and we're going to do it this year. We couldn't care less. We're above principles. Well, they can have it. They can have their contests, their Mr. Olympia, whatever it is. I couldn't care less. I actually enjoy my position where I'm at now a lot better.
Okay, so what would you say, because a lot of people who follow this sport and get into weightlifting, are kind of pressured into taking that competitive route, because a lot of the information providers and the magazines and even my magazine to some extent is guilty of possibly portraying professional bodybuilders in a little bit too much of a special light.
Yeah.
They may not have the greatest lives, and they may not be the greatest role models for people, but what is your feeling now just in general on competitive bodybuilding, having been through all that you have? Would you recommend it to people who are getting into weightlifting, or?
No, I would not recommend it, Bill, and I don't limit this accusation. I don't level it only against the IFBB. I see it in all organizations on every level, from the most limited local to the regional, to the state, to the national, the international, the amateur, and the professional. Everybody knows it. Everybody involved in the sport, including you, Joe Weider, Frank Zane, all the NAVA people, all the IFBB people know this, and nobody's willing to talk about it. Not a single one of them. They're all a bunch of namby-pamby crybabies who see all this immorality going on. They live their lives as a giant pretense, pretending this stuff is not happening. John Balick knows it over at Iron Man. Bob Kennedy knows it. They all talk about it at their cocktail parties before and after the contest, or it's implied. Contests are fixed. NPC contests, IFBB contests. And I get sick and tired of hearing people bring up the idea that, well, bodybuilding is subjective. So who are you to say that contests are fixed? That is not true. Anything that exists in reality can be viewed, judged objectively. There are objective criteria for judging bodybuilders. It's interesting, at the 1980 Olympia, the only people who saw Arnold as the winner were the 7 judges and his closest friends.
Mm-hmm.
None of the other competitors saw him as the winner. None of the audience, or very few, only those that were his friends. When Dorian Yates won the Mr. Olympia a couple weeks ago in Atlanta, Georgia, everybody, all of the audience, all of the judges, all of the competitors, without a single exception except for this guy named Greg Zulak, who has a bug up his butt about Mike Mentzer and his mustache, saw that Dorian Yates was the winner. If it was subjective, why didn't somebody say the guy who placed last was the winner? There are objective criteria, without a doubt. Bodybuilding is not subjective. When it's very, very close, you might, of course, haggle over one guy having a little bit more size versus the other guy having a little bit more definition, but those are still objective criteria. There is no way that Arnold Schwarzenegger deserved to win in 1980, not even close.
Well, so you would basically say that the competitive route is not the best way to go.
No.
And so what is it that people get into weight training for? Because you work with people one-on-one. You know what's going on. What do you recommend to them? Just to get what they can out of the activity?
Here's what I usually say. This is a wonderful endeavor in and of itself. There's a lot of self-satisfaction to be derived from recognizing that you were able to discipline yourself and use a certain amount of knowledge to take yourself from point A to point Z. Take your body from being average or below average to whatever it ultimately might be. If you want to compete, then just be warned beforehand. There's a lot of politics, and by politics I mean corruption, without a doubt. If you recognize that and you still want to do it, you've got my best wishes. But don't let me hear you complain later on.
Right.
If you know it beforehand and you decide or agree to go ahead with it, then you have no reason to complain.
Right. Now, then the people that you work with, basically, you encourage them to just really get what they can out of building their bodies and learn to use that to enhance their self-esteem and discipline and all of these things that are positive about the activity.
Yeah, something I tell my phone consultation clients especially. I know that you want muscles. That's true. It's valid. It's good. Nothing wrong with that. But if you were to look deep down inside of yourself, get honest. What you're really looking for, even a businessman, somebody who wants to make a lot of money, $1 million, they do want the money, and that's fine and good. At bottom, the purpose of all goal achievement is to develop a sense of mastery, efficacy, to achieve a certain type of happiness that can only be had as a result of achieving goals. A lot of people find once they acquire the muscles they'd always dreamed of, they're not really different inside. Because they don't take this philosophical approach as you started this particular issue with. And I just concluded it with. The idea is to gain a sense of mastery, a sense of self-esteem, happiness, which can only be derived from achieving goals.
Huh. Yeah, that's a...
But you have to have that stated explicitly at the outset. If you think that you're going to end up having those things only as a result of having the muscles, and you don't work on developing other aspects of your life along with it, like your philosophy, then you're just going to end up with a set of muscles and be bereft of the rest.
Right.
You and I both know, Bill, a lot of top bodybuilders. As top bodybuilders, of course, they have the big muscles, but they're self-arrested intellectually. They're no further ahead at the age of 30 or 40 mentally than they were 10 or 15 years ago when they started. They're psychologically beset by the same conflicts, the same sense of insecurity, uncertainty, self-doubt. they've got the big muscles, but they didn't get that sense of mastery, self-esteem, which can only be achieved by starting the whole process by stating explicitly, not only do I want big muscles, but I want self-confidence. I can only get that by enjoying the process, gaining the knowledge, recognizing that I am a more effective person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's great.
All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of Retro Muscle. I really hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to my channel, share with your friends, and please leave a comment below if you'd like to hear more of this interview. Please stay tuned. See you next time.